Да, всем привет. Меня зовут
Hello everyone, my name is Danila Urvantsev, and my talk today is dedicated to detecting multistage SQL injections. In terms of my experience, I worked at OPSEC, and now I do security analysis and web applications security. Today we'll be discussing SQL injections. You must understand that the SQL injection will be initiated not immediately, but after a while, or after 2 or 3 different queries, or you did injection before, and now you send a query, and the injection is initiated. So this is how SQL injections can be exploited. And this talk is purely for educational purposes. Let's first see which tools are available at the moment, how we can detect the SQL injections, what is the technology of testing these multi-stage injections. Then we will also look at the wrappers, and then we will draw some conclusions. Let's start with the basics. What are multi-stage injections? In fact, these are injections that require several stages. They are the stages of the business logic, and each stage may assume several queries. You may have a query to prepare news, then the impregnation of the injection, and then the third query will be the confirmation of publication of a piece of news. sqlmap now knows how to process payloads, change the main query, and perform one more query after the first one. sqltempa, like I said, processes the payload. sqlmap sends the payload to Tempa. Then you process it somehow in your customized manner, or you can use some default settings, and after that the payload is returned to sqlmap. There is a special function, or rather the parameter of sqlmap list tempers, and they're all located in the directory that's shown on the slide. This will give you a list of these default settings. You can prepare your own customized temper in neatpy. Is the file that is the file that you need to start with. You can start with an empty file, but you need to put it into the directory, otherwise you will not be able to produce your customized list. This is the list of existing tempers that you will be able to see if you enter the --list tempers command. This slide is on how you can change the query itself. We first talked about changing the payload. Now it's about modifying the query. You use the parameter. You send the code as if it were an onliner. The first line, semicolon, etc. Eval doesn't have access to payload. It knows nothing about payload. So if you are sending payload, but you substitute it with eval, payload will not be executed. The main payload, the main request is modified. The secondary one will not be modified. And you can modify basically any part of the query, including URI. Here you see an example of how eval works. You import the time library to change the title of the news. So you enter the parameter, and in your query the title will be modified as it is shown on the slide here. Next parameter, and the last one from sqlmap that can help us communicate with multi-stage injections, second reg and second URL. Second reg is like -r. It's a file that contains a request, a query, post, get, etc. With second URL, you send a URL that should be executed after the first request. So it can actually execute just one request after it executes the payload. The important bit here is that it is in conflict with eval when a WAF is determined. You will not be able to use eval and secondary rec at the same time. While you will be able to use secondary rel, you will not be able to affect the secondary, the next step. Here is an example. The first request for create post is executed, and then the next request is executed, not published. Right after the first one. Now, what do we have in sqlmap? First, there is a temper. You call it first. It modifies the payload, and it executes the Python code. Then there is eval. It is executed second. It modifies the main request or query, and it executes the Python code. And the secondary request that comes in third is not modifiable, and it's just one simple, straightforward request that you send. Now, let's go back to methodology. This is what you need to know when you analyze business logics. This is what will be easy to exploit at sqlmap. These are the requests that are executed there, and you'll be able to see the results immediately from this payload. If there is an SQLi, sqlmap will tell you after you send this request, and you can also do the preparation. All requests come before. You can do this with temper, or you can do it with eval. Everything goes before the primary payload can be easily performed. Out of the case that the sqlmap will not be able to run for you are checks and additional requests, modifiable requests that are executed after the original payload. We introduce an injection, and we want to make some other payload, some other requests, and we will not be able to do that. Secondary rec is not modifiable, and that's why, this is, you may want to, if the business logic says that a special request must be sent with certain parameters that depend on the previous ones, you will not be able to do this, and second rec will not help you here. And the same applies to other cases that I'm describing on this slide. In summary, how you can automate it, what you can do in order to detect this SQL injection. Well, first thing, you take sqlmap to analyze using tempers. You perform. You execute the primary request with temper or eval. Automatic exploit can be executed as well. You can do time-based injections, and sqlmap will return you all the data that it will be able to detect. But if you want to send extra requests after the main one, sqlmap will not be able to handle that. But there is Python. Why not write something of your own? We are using Python. One of the drawbacks is that you'll have to exploit everything manually. Here is an example of how temper can be coded for sqlmap. On the left is the simplest of cases. This is when you just code, yes, it's temper during the payload execution. If you need to input something, you input that. Some interesting functions you want to execute, and the temper function that will get the payload from sqlmap. On the right-hand side is a more complex case when we execute a request. It's not just a view from the console, but you input the request, then you execute it using a library, and you get the result. You add it to this variable to the payload. On the slide, you can see that on the result, we get the payload with added return from the server. Here is the full chain. We must exploit some preliminary steps before the injection. We execute them with the temper, and sqlmap gets its result. And we get, wow, we have an injection.
Python.
It's so smooth. This is Python. Multitask.
Достаточно медленно при time-based инъекциях. Вот. Также важным моментом является
Multi-streaming is important for Python. Time tracking and response status tracking and response to links tracking are three parameters that are important. Out-of-bound injections are also important. Don't forget about them. Add them to your payloads.
когда вы смотрите, у вас там уже есть хотя бы какой-то результат. Из выводов здесь стоит отметить, что в итоге sqlmap отлично.
In summary, sqlmap can help you to exploit, but it's not a very flexible tool. The only thing you can do is preliminary requests and will not help you with subsequent requests, while Python is super flexible and unfortunately will not enable you to exploit it by design out of the box. But it helps with more challenging business logic cases when you need to perform several other requests following the original one. Here is the QR code. There you'll find lots of descriptions of the functions of sqlmap. Unfortunately, this information is in Chinese. If you don't read Chinese, then you can use online translators. Thank you very much. I think we'll publish the presentation in our channel.